Now joining us, Michelle Goldberg. She wrote a piece called "A Christian Plot for Domination." It's in the Daily Beast. Michelle, welcome to the Young Turks.
Hi, thanks for having me.
No, I really appreciate you coming on. Now, this is about Dominionism and then Michelle Bachmann and Rick Perry's connection to it. First, let's talk about what Dominionism is. What is that?
Okay, well, basically, it's a relatively small but influential segment movement within evangelical Christianity that derives from an intensely theocratic movement known as Christian Reconstructionism. Christian Reconstructionism was a movement founded by a guy named R.J. Rushdoony, and it basically, I mean, you know, sometimes people kind of jokingly talk about the Christian Taliban, or maybe not so jokingly, but Christian Reconstructionism really does envision a sort of Christian Taliban. It calls for the death penalty for a whole host of crimes that are capital crimes in the book of Leviticus, you know, from homosexuality and to abortion to even apostasy and, you know, kind of chronic disobedience among children. I mean, it's a really far out religion. And so to a certain extent, it's a very marginal faith. You know, even most of the most radical figures in the Christian right are not usually super interested in promoting, you know, kind of widespread biblical death tribunals.
Right.
But where it's been influential is R.J. Rushdoony wrote a series of very carefully elaborated books called The Institutes of Biblical Law. And there are a couple of aspects of those books that have been very, very influential on the Christian right at large. He was really the first to elaborate the idea of a Christian worldview and the idea that kind of only ideas or facts or theories that start with biblical inerrancy as a premise can be taken seriously, and that everything else can be dismissed as the product of a distorted worldview. He was the first to develop ideas about Christian homeschooling. He developed this kind of alternative history of the United States in which, you know, America was founded as a Christian nation, and that, you know, kind of secularists have been covering up the true history for all of these years. And finally, he developed this idea called of Dominionism, which essentially holds that Christians have a right and a duty to take dominion over every aspect of civil life, you know, politics, culture, law, economics, etc.
So, Michelle, here's the thing. I don't think that there's a lot of people in the country who think that adulterers and gay people should be executed. And those are the you know, really out there stuff.
I don't think there are a lot of people I think that there are hardly any people in the Christian right who think that adulterers and gay people should be executed.
Absolutely, that's right. Okay, but at the same time, other portions of these beliefs have really taken hold. Whether it's, you know, something innocent like the spread of homeschooling, you know, people can disagree with that concept, but it's not about you know, it's not very nefarious if you ask me. Now, people really disagree with it in some ways, but it's not about a takeover of the government or anything like that. But things like this being a Christian nation, that was the founder's intent. Well, that's a lie. It's an absolute and utter lie, and it's a lie that has spread greatly, and I think a great number of Christians in the country do believe that. So,
well, and I would say, and I think where it's important to understand about it being a lie is that, you know, one of the most important things I think to grasp about the modern right, and particularly the modern religious right, is the way it's created a rationale for an entire parallel reality. I mean, in a way, it's an intensely postmodern movement, even though it sees itself as kind of a champion of, you know, eternal verities. And so, in a sense, it's saying that since nothing that doesn't start from its kind of religious premises can be seen as can be recognized as the truth, that it, you know, it kind of gives you a kind of carefully worked out theological justification for the whole undermining of reality that has become such a feature of our politics.
Right. It's the alternative reality based on their interpretation of their religious text. So if anything in the real world does not match up to it, well, then it must by definition be wrong, and the biblical text must be right, and that reality must be warped to meet their interpretation of that text. Well, look, Al-Qaeda does this too. And so, and now people will say, well, but wait a minute, Al-Qaeda is violent and these guys aren't violent, except our Christian right sometimes starts wars where hundreds of thousands of people die. So that's what I'm most concerned about. And Michelle, that's part of what I want to get to here, right? So how big is this group that believes in things, the underlying premise being exactly what you're pointing out. The inerrant word of God is the Bible, right? And if the inerrant word of God is the Bible, then, for example, Armageddon is going to come, and if it comes...
Well, I would say a couple of different things. I mean, Dominionism is there. A huge number of Americans believe that the Bible is the inerrant word of God. And it certainly is not only Dominionists who believe in biblical literalism. So that's one piece. But the other piece, and what I want to make clear, is that, when I wrote in my piece that both Rick Perry and Michelle Bachmann have ties, really close ties, to this kind of fringe movement called Dominionism, that doesn't necessarily mean, I don't think either one of them, if they get into office, are going to make a priority of instituting the death penalty for gay people. What I do think is that, just as it's sometimes very difficult for people who are not part of the religious right to take seriously. People tend to assume that, well, yes, people say a lot of wacky things, but, either Michelle Bachmann's not serious and Rick Perry, to the extent that he is serious, is, just kind of a charlatan, and he's saying these things and allying with these people to get votes. Well, when you're trying to glean a candidate's worldview, and when you're trying to kind of glean, their general philosophy, well, where do you start? One way that you start is you look at who they themselves, you look at the books they themselves recommend and the people that they say have influenced them, and the people that they say have been important to them. So if you look at Michelle Bachmann, she said, and I'm not putting words in her mouth, that people who have been influential in her intellectual development, she's talked about John Eidsmoe. John Eidsmoe was her professor at Oral Roberts University. She was his research assistant on a book called Christianity and the Constitution, which argued that America was meant to be a Christian nation, that actually argued literally that America was meant to be a theocracy and should become so again. He really is a kind of a straight-up Christian Reconstructionist. She's talked about the influence of Francis Schaeffer, who was very important in kind of taking some of these ideas from Christian Reconstructionism and translating them for the broader evangelical movement. Among other things, he said that it would come a time when, if the United States did not ban abortion, then an armed uprising against the government would become necessary. So she's, and one could kind of go on, and I do in the piece.
Right.
And similarly, just recently, Rick Perry had this huge rally in Texas where the people that he was working with on this rally are people who've basically translated Dominionist ideas for a Pentecostal audience, a movement called the New Apostolic Reformation.
So, all right, now, Michelle Bachmann, there's no question about the connections to Francis Schaeffer, and Wilkins, the guy who writes about how slavery was so hunky-dory and part of what it was intended in the Bible, yada yada. All those things, we've covered them. I get it. There's no question she's a true believer. Like, there was always a question whether George Bush was a true believer or not. Michelle Bachmann, no question, a true believer, right? Rick Perry, true believer or not? Given what you cover here, what you know, what's your sense of it?
To be honest, I really don't know. I think it's probably a mix. I mean, I think, look, there's no doubt that Rick Perry has done things that has made the Christian right unhappy. For example, ordering the HPV vaccine, which showed that he was at least as amenable to kind of taking orders from the pharmaceutical lobbyists, and that's what's kind of usually, most people who follow Texas politics say that, he made this policy was a result of kind of donations from pharmaceutical companies. It made the Christian right very unhappy. To a certain extent, though, look at George Bush. I tend to think he was more of a true believer than not. But in a way, didn't really matter. I mean, what mattered about George Bush was what was in his policies, not what was in his heart. I think that, from my point of view, it's unquestionable that he, kind of Christianized our government to an unprecedented degree. I mean, you'll remember how many jobs within the bureaucracy were filled by people either from Patrick Henry, which is the fundamentalist college for homeschoolers, or from Liberty University, Jerry Falwell's university. There was, I wrote a whole book about this called Kingdom Coming. You saw, for example, huge amounts of money, via the faith-based initiative being channeled to kind of right-wing charities, being channeled to things like crisis pregnancy centers that exist to both kind of lie to women about their health and try to talk them out of having abortions. You saw a new tolerance for religious discrimination in hiring of positions that were being filled with federal contracts. So George Bush, the evangelicals that George Bush allied himself with, were far more moderate than the people that Rick Perry is allying himself with. And, so again, whether or not he's really allied with them in his heart, I think matters less than what these alliances tell us about what kind of a president he would be.
Michelle, I'll tell you, the thing that I care most about is the question of war, right? Because, George Bush bringing all these, fundamentalist people that I couldn't disagree more with it, and they had these young kids to fire the U.S. attorneys, etc. There's a million things that went wrong there with all the people that he hired, all the faith-based initiatives that he did, which funnels money to the churches so that they'll support Republicans, etc. I get all that. But when George Bush apparently told Jacques Chirac, oh, part of the reason we're going into Iraq is because Gog and Magog are supposed to come out of Iraq. Okay, now that's a whole different ballgame. That's a level of scary belief in fundamentalist religion that costs so many people their lives. That's exactly what I'm not willing to tolerate. So I guess my question is, more than anything else, is, do these dominionists, whether it's Michelle Bachmann, who's a true believer, or Rick Perry, who brings in these people and has to appease them if he becomes president, do they really believe? I guess they do, but are they really going to push towards Armageddon? That's the thing that, I know it sounds so crazy when you say it,
right.
but they do believe it.
There's a couple of things. I mean, it's complicated, right? And so we probably don't have a time to get into all of the nuances here. Christian Reconstructionists have different beliefs about the end times than kind of most evangelicals and most dominionists. But I will say that, look, there's no question that Michelle Bachmann, has a kind of end times theology that centers around Israel and the Middle East. She's been very clear that, as she said, a curse comes into play when the United States ceases to support Israel. And, supporting Israel, in her view, means supporting, some of the most kind of radical elements in Israeli society. Similarly, the people, one of the people that Rick Perry has allied himself with is a guy named John Hagee. Funnily enough, I actually saw John Hagee a couple of times last week in Israel. I mean, first speaking at Glenn Beck's rally, and then I kind of ran into him being shown around the West Bank by the IDF. He's a major voice for, for basically an apocalyptically minded foreign policy, who basically, lobbies for American support, again, not just for Israel, but for kind of radical settlement building and the, and kind of policies that ensure that there will never be a Palestinian state and thus never be peace in the region.
For people who don't know, you have to understand, these guys are not allies of Israel. They claim to be allies of Israel. They shout it from every rooftop. They're the exact opposite. They're the greatest enemies of Israel because their number one objective, Michelle, is not to help Israel. They couldn't give a damn about Israel. Their number one objective is to make sure that the Palestinians don't have a state, because that goes against their biblical text. And the whole purpose of that is so that there is a great, great cataclysmic war there that then leads to the end times, right? So, and what gets destroyed in that war? Israel gets destroyed. Almost all the Jews who live in Israel get destroyed. And they look forward to that with glee. What kind of friend of Israel is that?
I mean, certainly. They see, kind of, for them, an apocalyptic war in the Middle East is a feature, not a bug. And so they have, a carefully worked out theology, a whole series of things that have to happen before Jesus can return. The Jews have to return. There has to be a great ingathering of the Jews to the biblical land of Israel. The rise of the Antichrist, who is sometimes pictured as it used to be pictured as the Soviet Union or the Islamic Caliphate. Occasionally it's pictured as the Secretary General of the United Nations, followed by, again, yes, a third world, the rapture, a third world war in the Middle East, blood as high as a horse's bridle, and then, the kind of glorious return of Jesus Christ, and 1,000 years of peace on earth for Christians while everyone else, is consigned to hell. There are certainly right-wingers in Israel that are happy enough to, accept these people's help because they kind of figure, well, if these kind of rubes want to lobby for us, we know that the prophecies aren't going to come true, and so we're happy enough to accept their aid. But, it's basically an alliance of people who see a third world war in the Middle East as kind of a portal to paradise, and kind of very cynical forces in Israel that are happy to accept help from anyone who will help them head off a Palestinian state and maintain greater Israel, which I think a great many people who are interested in the region see as being the death knell to the idea of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state.
So look, it's all fun and games when it's, in their heads and they think, oh, Mordor says that if the elves and the dwarves fight, it's going to be great and we're going to live in heaven forever. And, when Harry Potter beats Dumbledore or whoever he fights, it's going to be all fantastic. But it's a different thing when it's in the real world. And I remember when George Bush was president, and a lot of these evangelical leaders wrote a letter to him saying, don't you dare be even-handed with the Palestinians. Your job is to make sure that they are crushed and that they never have a state so we can have our Armageddon where everybody dies, right? And it had an effect. And then the Bush administration came out and said, yeah, we didn't quite really mean even-handed, and we will let Israel do, or the right wing of Israel, do whatever the hell they want, right? So it has a real effect on real people. So I guess, Michelle, my final question is, okay, so I know where Bachmann stands, and Bachmann will push towards this, no question about it. She's a lunatic of the first order, right? Rick Perry will bring these people in, my guess, based on what you've written, what others have written. He'll bring these people into the House and deal with them for as long as he thinks it is his political advantage, and God help us all what that means, right? But my ultimate question is, how many people in this country, and I know obviously it's not going to be an exact number, believe that this is a wonderful scenario, this Armageddon where we all die, right? And actually actively push towards it. Is it like 12 nut jobs who lead these groups?
No.
Or is it 12 million? Is it 100 million? I need to know how afflicted the United States of America is with this insanity.
I would say, look, right now, and when we're talking about this end time stuff, we're actually moving away from dominionism, and we're moving more into kind of questions about it's premillennial dispensationalism, to use the technical term, but it's an incredibly common. These kind of beliefs are incredibly common among American evangelicals. I think that I think that you could probably safely say, a fifth of the population holds these kind of views.
Fantastic. So the rest of the world, you have a sense that 20% of the population of the United States would like the world to end, and they're trying their damnedest to make sure that that happens in a great war that kills nearly all of us. But luckily, the United States of America only has the largest and greatest military ever built by man. And now we have two people who are roughly in that group or associated with that group who would like to become the commander-in-chief of that army. Enjoy.
That's about the size of it.
Okay. All right. Michelle Goldberg from the Daily Beast. Her article, A Christian Plot for Domination, is certainly a fascinating read. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me.